Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about Dr. David Owen Filson's dissertation, A Fountainhead of Misunderstanding, J. Oliver Buswell, Cornelius Van Til, and the context and contours of an apologetic debate. This is kind of a part two of our first one where we talked all about Van Til and presuppositionalism and J. Oliver Buswell and his context and what beef he had with Van Til. And it's really illuminating, even though this was taking place back in like the 50s and 60s, 40s even. But it's illuminating for us today because a lot of these objections continue to be raised against presuppositionalism and Van Til in particular. So we're going to continue on with paradox, creation, and common ground. We'll see if we get there because Dr. Filson is the man, and we go all over the place. We talk about bodybuilding and all sorts of other stuff too. So we'll see. But before we jump in, just want to thank the Patreon patrons, the supporters. You guys can find the link in the description. If you've benefited from this show, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. Another way is to subscribe on YouTube and hit the notification bell so you can see all the new episodes as they come out. And then the third way is to go to Apple Podcasts and leave me a 5-star review and leave me a comment as well. All that will help the algorithms for the podcast version of the episode. That would be huge. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks for everything that you're doing. Like I've said in previous episodes, I'd love to do this full time and just travel the country, travel the world, bringing you guys the best podcast episodes that I can make. So the more people supporting that, the better ones we can make. So without further ado, let's bring in Dr. Filson. David, thanks so much for coming on the podcast again, man. This is awesome.
Well, my pleasure. So good to be with you.
Yeah. So last time we talked about lifting and Gaston and all sorts of fun stuff before we got in. So people have to listen to that one. It's really good. But I thought before we get into the three specific things we're going to talk about, I thought maybe you could give us a brief sketch of like what do we mean by presuppositionalism? What is presup?
Yeah. Well, that was, of course, one of the areas where Buswell, who coined the phrase or coined the term presuppositionalism, he got the term from Alan McRae, who said that what Van Til was practicing was a presuppositionism. And so Buswell called it presuppositionalism, which was not unfamiliar nomenclature for idealism, German and British idealism, of course. But he said that's what Van Til was doing. Now, of course, he did not describe Van Til's method as presuppositionalism in a complimentary way. He was very critical of that. What was interesting, though, was that Buswell didn't even have a good boilerplate idealistic understanding of what presuppositionalism or what a presupposition would be in terms of transcendent accounting for transcendent basis for knowledge. Buswell had a more, how would I say it, almost a, I don't know, it was kind of a Reedian take on presupposition. And by that he meant we hold that a person's presuppositions are those things that they hold to having tested them by good and sufficient reason. Mm-hmm. And so even his understanding of presupposition was basically we all have our preconceived notions, and hopefully we have tested them by reason or sense experience or some other thing, and we can hold to them as reliable. So even when he described presupposition or presuppositionalism and foisted that upon Van Til, he didn't have Van Til's understanding of presuppositionalism, which that's not really something Van Til used, though he had to essentially take that on because by the time he writes Presuppositionalism and Presuppositionalism Continued in the 48 and 49 issues of the Bible Today, which was the magazine that Buswell edited and Van Til contributed to that magazine, the term was there. He would speak more in terms of a transcendental argument, etc. But by a presuppositional apologetic or a presuppositional epistemology, we're talking about those things which make the requisite atmosphere for knowing, if I can say it that way, possible, or that which can account for reality as we experience it and the requisites of intelligibility, such as the laws of logic, induction upon which science depends, deduction upon which math depends, the normativity of nature upon which science depends, objectivity and predication, morality, personhood, etc. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just the fact that we all have preconceived notions. Of course, we all know that. Everyone has preconceived notions. Van Til's understanding, or a presuppositional apologist understanding of presuppositionalism, is far more than that. It's not just that we all have preconceived notions. It's what makes the very concept of conception possible.
Yeah.
What makes intelligibility possible? How can you even account for intelligibility?
Yeah, man, that's really good. That's such a good clarification. So a lot of people will think, and some people online haven't done a great job, who self-professed presuppositionalists who say, well,
Yeah,
I'm presupposing the truth of Christianity as if it's like an active choice. I'm taking this on and then I'm going to go and demonstrate it. And
almost axiomatic in that sense.
right, and it's like that's more kind of Gordon Clark. That's maybe what
Yeah,
Francis Schaeffer had in mind.
right.
But Van Til's was more like exactly what you said. It's an objective presupposition, not just a subjective. I chose this presupposition, but what must be true, given that we can have knowledge and knowledge of moral facts and an intelligible universe at all. Oh, all those things are presupposed. Presuppose the ontological trinity, as Van Til would say, that's the groundwork, the bedrock, the foundation.
The concrete universal.
Exactly. Yeah, the concrete. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So I think that's so helpful to understand that it's not, at least Van Tilian presuppositionalism is not an active choice saying, look, I'll just presuppose this and blah, blah, blah. It's no, like if you and I are able to talk at all, both of us are standing on some presuppositions that must be the case. And I want to show you that those presuppositions are actually God. It's the ontological trinity.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we got some clarity there. On our last episode, it was so good. We got to listen. I want to go listen to it again too. But we ended before we got to like paradox and Van Til's notion of paradox creation and common ground. So I thought maybe we could just jump in with Van Til's notion of paradox and why Boswell had such a problem with it.
Well, Boswell had a problem with Van Til's understanding of paradox. Of course, for Van Til, paradox is not contradiction, but it really is grounded in things like God being the concrete universal, and that in Him the problem of the one and the many is solved, unity and diversity, etc. Boswell, of course, was always keenly sensitive to any and all forms of idealism, quasi-idealism. He was worried about pantheism, and he recognized that Van Til was a, quote, zealous anti-Barthian, yet he believes that Van Til was basically guilty of the same denial of consistency as Barth, and that for him paradox is contradictory. And I think there's yet another example of not only did he not understand Van Til's understanding of presuppositionalism or presupposition, but he totally missed Van Til's critique of Barth, because it's one thing to say, I recognize he's a zealous anti-Barthianism, and then at the same time paint him with the same brush as Barth. And so for Boswell, he viewed paradox essentially as contradiction, and said that Van Til was quite content with contradiction, and nothing could have been further from the truth. He believed that Van Til was essentially Hegelian. That famous passage where he says, I have great respect for you, but look at your feet, you have tracked in the Hegelian mud. And this is particular with regard to Van Til's understanding of the Trinity. It's interesting. Interesting statement here that I'll read if I can. This is a thing that Boswell jumped on. Van Til says, whereas for most of us, paradox is a misfortune, something to be carefully studied and resolved so that the apparent contradiction will be seen clearly to be no contradiction. For Dr. Van Til, on the other hand, there are certain specific, deeply established paradoxes which must form a part of theology. He says to hold to this position, the doctrine of the Trinity, requires us to say that while we shun as poison the idea of the really contradictory, we embrace with passion the idea of the apparent or the apparently contradictory. It is through the latter alone that we can reject the former. If it is the self-contained ontological Trinity that we need for the rationality of our interpretation of life, It is the same ontological trinity that requires us to hold to the apparently contradictory. This ontological trinity is, as the larger catechism, the Westminster Standards puts it, incomprehensible. So Van Til is dealing with a couple of things there. Number one, finitum non capax infinitum.
Yep.
If something appears contradictory within God's revelation, we have to humble ourselves and accept the mysterious. And that's Van Til being Calvinistic. Calvin says a good theologian, when God has been pleased to cease to close his mouth in revealing himself, the true theologian puts his hand over his mouth and lives with the mystery, or we might say in Van Tilian language, the paradox. But this ties into, of course, Boswell's concern, among others. In the 50s, there were others who were Jesse de Boer and others who were very concerned that Van Til had become a wholesale idealist, largely because he used idealist nomenclature in his program. But he wasn't, like say concrete universal. The idea in idealism of the concrete universal being this kind of historical amalgam. How to say it? The idea that the absolute or the concrete universal in Hegelian terms is this historical amalgam wherein the absolute needs the finite particulars in order to arrive at this kind of omega point of realization.
It sounds like that's where like Alfred North Whitehead got process theology from.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely, for sure. And Barth, of course, all Barth had to do, as you know, was take that idealist concept, and you have the absolute and the particulars coming together in the Christ event, which redefines election, that God and man actualize, actually. And so that was an application of that kind of historical, the absolute, sort of realizing itself through the amalgam of the particulars. Yeah. And Van Til says, of course, no, there is a concrete universal, but it's not found in some Hegelian historical process, or what would later be, as you apply it to the state, kind of a Marxist historical process. So that's not something that Van Til actually took up, but a Hegelian historical process. You don't need to look for a process like that, but to the self-contained, absolutely personal triune God. In other words, there is no aspect or aspect of God. There is nothing of God that is still awaiting some kind of omega point or arrival. And so when he would speak of, the triune God as a concrete universal, that was not, as Boswell might have said, okay, you're trafficking here in contradiction and you're veering off the course of Christian orthodoxy. That was not a concession to idealism. It was his way of using idealist nomenclature to critique idealism.
Yeah. And what I like too is he's contextualizing, because Van Til is also an evangelist. Like, he wanted to reach the idealists and saying, hey, look, I know you guys have this notion of concrete universal. The concrete universal only makes sense over here. Come on over to this side. And the concrete universal has to be self-contained. It has to be a se, as theologians say. Yeah. And otherwise we can't make sense of the world that he created. He's not a abstract universal. He's concrete. He is a person. He's an absolute person. And all those words meant so much. Absolute personality from, Boston personalists and all sorts of stuff. It's fantastic, man. I love that.
Yeah, it really is. And that's something that I think Boswell failed to understand, that for God to be absolute personality, or absolutely personal, absolute, meaning that he is infinite, immutable, self-contained. He is not subject to a historical process of becoming. He is absolute, eternal, aseity, right? And but he's also absolute personality, meaning he thinks, speaks, reveals, acts. And that is that forms then the Principium Essendi of Van Til epistemology. The Principium Essendi is the triune God of the Bible. Of course, the Principium Cognoscendi Externum is the Bible of the triune God. So this absolute person, this absolutely personal God, is the starting point Essendi, the Principium Essendi. And because he is absolutely personal, he can communicate and reveal, which is what he's done in general and special revelation, both of which are sufficient for what they are tasked to do. We realize that special revelation is because the general revelation is not sufficient to reveal certain things about God as Savior. But insofar as it is tasked, general revelation is sufficient to reveal God as Creator, Judge, etc. And so that language of absolute personality is really important to the idea of God as concrete universal. It's very important to his theology proper, and really everything flows from that. I mean, if we're going to think about requisites for intelligibility, and our knowledge being analogous knowledge or icon knowledge, of course, that ties into Van Til's idea that there are no brute facts, meaning that not just there are no uninterpreted facts, but that there's no phenomenon that does not already have its being as a created entity, say a rock or a tree or whatever, as well as its definition given to it by God. That's what he means by no brute facts. And so all of that is necessary for this epistemological program and an epistemological accounting for intelligibility.
Yeah, dude, amen. I always get excited about his no brute facts doctrine or thesis. I wonder, I don't know if Van Til's ever talked about this, but I wonder, is God a brute fact? God's existence, the self-contained, ontological Trinity, is God's, because he doesn't like define himself. He didn't create himself, obviously, and he doesn't. Well, I don't know. I guess, does he interpret himself? Is he? It makes sense if he is the one brute fact. Okay, fine, one brute fact, and the rest fall out from that. But what do you make of that? Do you think God's existence is a brute fact?
Well, I think we have to be careful there. Yeah, Van Til didn't use that language. I think it would be better to say that because of God as being the concrete universal or absolute personality, he is thereby the creator and interpreter of all that he creates. Thereby, there are no brute facts. And so in those sense, phenomenon is a created thing, and God is not a created phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
That said, God is neither is God uninterpreted by himself.
Yeah.
He has exhaustive self-awareness, exhaustive self-knowledge. And as Edwards would say, that exhaustive self-knowledge is how we account for the eternal generation of the Son, or the Logos. The Logos of God, and this is Edwardsian language, is the eternal self-awareness, self-understanding of God. And so God is not up for debate as to how God is defined. So in that sense, God is not uninterpreted, but there's no higher standard of interpretation than God himself. He is the epistemological starting point for the intelligibility of interpretation, and he is the archetypal basis of our, we might say, ectypal knowledge. So he is the archetypal basis for our analogous knowledge of what he has created and what he has interpreted and given its meaning. And so, Van Til doesn't refer to God as a brute fact, but rather as absolute being, absolute personality. But he would say that God is not uninterpreted. He is his own interpretation. And I think, this ties into Exodus 3. I am that I am. God is eternally self-aware and eternally exhaustively self-knowing. So the phrase finitum non capax infinitum, the finite cannot comprehend the infinite, but the infinite certainly, and absolutely must comprehend the infinite in order for there to be the possibility of true revelation of himself, right?
Yeah. That's I love that phrase. I grabbed that from your dissertation as well. Finitum or finitum non capax infinitum. The finite cannot comprehend the infinite. And I was thinking about Edwards too, because he does a lot, and you're up to date on Edwards yourself as well. But Edwards has a emphasis on infinity, and how, you know, the infinite creature, if he were infinite, though he's finite, if he were infinite, he would be God. So there's no way that you could, only God is infinite. So that's an important point, I thought, from Edwards and from Van Til about paradox. Gordon Clark is reportedly said, you know, a paradox is Charlie horse between the ears. That can be like massaged with the muscle of reason, or the masseuse of reason, or something. Are paradoxes? So Buswell was upset because Van Til prioritized certain paradoxes, said they're bedrock, that you have to have them in theology. Will we ever get to the point where we can massage those paradoxes? Like, is this a creator-creature facet of the creator-creature distinction, or is this something that is just not going to make sense to us this side of eternity? But then, you know, once all things have been revealed to us, maybe we can resolve some of these paradoxes.
Yeah, I think well, as 1 John 3:1-3, behold, what manner of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the children of God. The reason the world does not know us, does not know him. What we shall be has not yet been revealed. But we know this, that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Now, of course, this ties into, say, Edwards, who lived from 1703 to 58, his idea of the beatific vision.
Right.
And that there will be a transformational knowing, a knowing of Christ, soul to soul, as it were. That will be a transformational knowledge, and yet we will always be the creaturely. And so even in our glorified state and being made like Christ, and the noetic effects of sin no longer being a restraint for us epistemologically, we will still be the creaturely. And while we will have, as Edwards says, all eternity to grow in blessedness and happiness in the knowledge of the things of God, which is an incredible thing for theology nerds like us now.
That's right.
You know, as Paul says, we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. I mean, there's going to be such expansive capacity and all eternity to grow in the knowledge of God, and yet we will never exhaustively know the infinite, because we will never be infinite. Though we will live for eternity, we will never be, as if I can say it this way, possessed of or characterized by infinity. So we will always be the creaturely. And so, yeah, I think that the finitum non capax infinitum will always be a reality. That doesn't mean that the finite cannot apprehend the infinite. So while we cannot have comprehensive knowledge, we have apprehensive knowledge of the infinite. By apprehensive, we don't mean like hesitant, like I'm apprehensive of this, but to apprehend. You know, for instance, I'm always watching, like I geek out watching snake videos. There's this guy in Africa, Dingo Dinkelman, who, you know, keeps snakes, and he does all these educational videos with snakes and so forth. And, you know, like if I see like a Texas rat snake in our neighborhood, I'll always catch it and play with it. And so I have an apprehensive knowledge, you know, a degree of knowledge, but I don't have comprehensive knowledge or expert knowledge. But even when we say someone has expert knowledge, they are an expert in their field. They do not have infinite knowledge of that, because the only being, the only person who has infinite knowledge is the one who has the capacity for infinite knowledge, which would require infinity of that being or that person, and then the person who is, of course, the creator of all that is, which is God himself. And so knowledge is, I mean, we're talking about epistemology here, but the difference between God's knowing and our knowing, while it is essential that we maintain that difference between the creator creature for the sake that essential binary between the creator creature, not just that we maintain a proper doctrine of God and a proper anthropology, but apart from it, we don't even have a basis for epistemology, because our knowing of anything is analogous to God's knowing of something, not equal to, In other words, we don't know 2 plus 2 equals 4 in exactly the same way that God does. We know it as a mirror or a reflection or an image of his knowledge of that. There is more to 2 plus 2 equals 4 that God knows by virtue of being the basis of, say in this case, deductive reasoning than we'll ever know.
Yeah.
And that's why, we talked about presupposition a minute ago. That's why the triune God of the Bible, as our principium essendi, is essential for essential requisite for intelligibility.
Yeah, man, amen to that as well. And that's why a lot of people have a hard time with analogical knowledge, and I don't know why they do. It seems like our forefathers did not have such a hard time with analogical knowledge. If God has a quantitatively different amount of knowledge than I do, but also qualitatively
Yeah.
and quantitatively. He knows in a different manner, and he knows much more than me. Okay, most people have the problem with the qualitative because they say, well, if 2 plus 2 equals 4 means something different for God, then, how do we know? And we fall into skepticism. And you say, well, analogical knowledge means that we both, just like analogical language means we can speak literally of something, even though not univocally about something. And so analogical knowledge likewise follows that we can know 2 plus 2 equals 4. God can know 2 plus 2 equals 4. Yet God knows more about 2 plus 2 equals 4, and he knows it in a different way, being that he is the ground of 2 plus 2 equals 4, whereas I'm his image bearer who came along after and discovered that, or was taught that, and put that up here.
Yeah, that's well said. It really gets down to this, for Van Til, univocal thinking rather than analogous knowledge really strikes at the heart of the creator-creature distinction, because, as you said, God knows not just quantitatively but qualitatively, and it gets down to this: he knows. It's not that 2 plus 2 equals 4 means something different to him than it means to us, that we think 2 plus 2 equals 4. He really knows 2 plus 2 equals 5, and we're in darkness on it. No. It's not that it means something different, but he is the ground of its meaning to begin with, and we are not. That alone ought to stop us in our tracks and go, okay, wait a second. I know 2 plus 2 equals 4, and God knows 2 plus 2 equals 4, but I'm not the ground of 2 plus 2 equals 4 the way that he is the ground of 2 plus 2 equals 4. It's just possible that my knowledge of 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not autonomous, as if I am the divine ground of 2 plus 2 equals 4, or as if the knowledge of 2 plus 2 equals 4 is just some neutral base of knowledge that God has to arrive at, and we arrive at, and we can all agree on it. The binary of the creator-creature distinction is crucial, and I use that language of binary because binary is so under attack today. We try to do away with all kinds of binaries, and I really believe, I'm getting a little bit off on a rabbit trail here, but when you look at some of the things that are going on metaphysically today, be it issues of ethnicity, gender, etc., and some of the metaphysical conclusions that are being drawn, I think what ultimately is the goal here is not denying the binary between male and female, or between this ethnicity and that is an ethnicity, or even the binary between good and evil. I think the binary under ultimate attack is the creator-creature distinction.
Yeah.
And
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. And so we see that the importance of the creator-creature distinction, what we've been talking about for the last few minutes, heavily as it relates to knowledge and epistemology, but it's everything,
Yeah. Real quick, can you go back over the cognoscendi? I just missed it. I just lost it. Yeah, but the three of them. There's
our principium cognoscendi externum.
Yep.
So our starting point for knowing external to us is the Bible of the triune God, his self-revelation in his authoritative inspired word. Our principium essendi, or the starting point of being, is the triune God of the Bible.
Yeah. So our principium essendi, that's God, the ontological Trinity, and the principium cognoscendi, and so think of cognition, of knowledge, epistemology. Externum is the word. It's external to us. I like to think of it that way. And then the principium cognoscendi internal is internum is the Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah.
And so
That's sort of
he's applying the externum internal to us and causing us to believe that it's truth.
it's truth. That's 1 Corinthians 1 and 2. You have really in 1 Corinthians 1 and 2 the biblical basis for a Van Tilian epistemology, which is the necessity of regeneration. I believe the doctrine of regeneration is crucial. From a homiletics perspective, you see in the preaching of David Martin Lloyd Jones this real heavy emphasis on regeneration, but also say in Edwards and his doctrine of the new sense of the heart, the place of regeneration is crucial. And so for Van Til, and I think about Lloyd Jones and Van Til because I have back here behind me this one of my favorite pictures.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, isn't that a great one?
Yeah.
Of who knows what they're laughing about? A lot of memes could be built off of this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, the place of regeneration, 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, and us having, as Paul says, the mind of Christ now. And why do we have the mind of Christ? Because we are indwelt by the Spirit of Christ. And so that has, regeneration has crucial implications for our epistemology.
Yeah. So this is a really good transition. So over creation, which I think we can transition smoothly into, but into common ground, because someone will hear, you have to be regenerated to know stuff. And for those who are unfamiliar with regeneration, just think of generate, being born, and then regenerate, born again. And so it sounds like, and this is a charge that I don't know if Buswell brought it against Van Til, but lots of people, critics of Van Til, say, well, you're saying that the unbeliever can't know anything. So what do we make with this strong sense, I think biblical sense of regeneration and principium, ascendi, cognoscendi, externum and internum? What do we make of unbelievers, non-believers knowing things?
Yeah, so far from the unbeliever not being able to know anything, Van Til would say, not just is he capable of knowing, he knows God, and not just God in some generic kind of, general or generic theistic being sense. The unbeliever knows the triune God unavoidably, inescapably, because he is created in the image of the triune God. Now he suppresses Romans 1:18-32. Of course, he suppresses that knowledge out of a commitment to wickedness. But the unbeliever knows the true God, and yet Van Til could say he doesn't know God. And so what he means by that is he does not acknowledge God for who he is, but he unavoidably, inescapably, like you can run but you can't hide. Epistemologically, he knows who God is, and it's that very point that nullifies Buswell and a host of others. This is a common trope about Van Til, is that he denies common ground, or he denies a point of contact, and it's actually Van Til who saves the single legitimate point of contact between the believer and the unbeliever, namely the imago Dei. It's because the imago Dei, because man is created in the image of the triune God, that not just is a point of contact possible, the point of contact is unavoidable. It is indeed very, very real. What Van Til is doing, though, is saying the point of contact is not this supposed neutral starting ground, and you appeal to autonomous reason, you practice what he called blockhouse methodology, assuming autonomous reason, and then sort of piling up like Legos a cumulative case for the high probability of the existence of a supreme being. No, for Van Til, Christianity is the only reasonable position to hold, and that is because man is created in the image of the Logos himself.
That's so helpful to think through. It is it's a biblical picture of humanity, and I think you're right that it does save the common ground, because you're saying, hey, look, I'm not saying that you're stupid. You're probably smarter than me. I'm not saying that you don't know anything. I think you probably know a lot. But the reason that you are able to think, the reason that the world is intelligible to you and that you can store up knowledge is because you're made in the image of the God who created the world and who sustains the world. And so when I affirm that you are smart and that you know stuff and that you're really competent, I'm also saying that's because of the God who you're denying with all of the knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an incredibly dignifying position if we communicate it sensitively and with a little bit of emotional, IQ. It's an incredibly dignifying way of looking at, our unbelieving friends and loved ones and so forth, is to acknowledge that we are both created in the image of God. And so we have an intractable starting point for knowing and relating and appealing to our unbelieving friends and neighbors. It's very dignifying.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think maybe Frame has used this language. I'm not sure where I got this, but it could be Van Til himself, that like metaphysically we have all things in common, even though epistemologically we have nothing in common if we don't both have the same logical starting point of the ontological trinity. Does that sound like a fair assessment?
That's Van Til. That's Van Til.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I love that. Well, so that brings us to creation. Boswell said that Van Til didn't believe in like the special creation of Adam, and he had some beef with his theological anthropology. What do you make of that? Why did he have this misconception in the first place, I guess?
Yeah. So this ties into Boswell's notion, of course, that Van Til was an idealist, and he was always very, very concerned about pantheism and so forth. But his concern of Van Til as an idealist essentially led him to believe that Van Til saw the created realm as merely something that existed in the mind of God, and reality was not something that for which Van Til could account. And because of that, he also, and this is one of the other interesting things I bring out in the dissertation, and of course this is something that's been of real controversy over the last maybe 10 years or so, and that's the historicity of Adam as the first unique created man. He held that Van Til thereby denied a historical Adam, which is just utterly absurd. And here's another one, example of where Van Til would bend over backwards trying to explain himself to Boswell, and he did it beautifully. In fact, I used the things that he wrote to Boswell as what I call part of my Van Til starter kit, which includes the two articles in the Bible Today, Presuppositionalism and Presuppositionalism Continued. Two other pieces that I put in my Van Til starter kit is the Nature and Scripture article from the Infallible Word, and then finally in March 1969 letter from Van Til to Francis Schaeffer. So I call that my Van Til starter kit. But those two articles, Presuppositionalism and Presuppositionalism Continued, Van Til attempted to give a robust accounting for what he meant and didn't mean by presupposition or presuppositional thinking. He did the same thing with paradox. Here's what I mean. Here's what I don't mean by paradox. I'm not saying that I believe in contradiction. I'm saying I believe in mystery because of the creator-creature distinction. And then with creation, so here's I'm going to read a paragraph that is going to be important for understanding why Boswell did what he did. Now, this is from Van Til. This is from Common Grace, pages 8 and 9. Take me just about maybe a minute to read it. It appears then that a universal judgment about the nature of all existence is presupposed even in the description of the modern scientist. It appears further that this universal judgment negates the heart of the Christian theistic point of view. According to any consistently Christian position, God and God only has ultimate definitory power. God's description or plan of the fact makes the fact what it is. That kind of touches back on what we were talking about a little bit ago, brute fact and interpretation and so forth. What the modern scientist ascribes to the mind of man, Christianity ascribes to God. True, the Christian claims that God did not even need a formless stuff for the creation of facts, but this point does not nullify the contention that what the Christian ascribes to God, the modern scientist, even when engaged in mere description, virtually ascribes to man. Two creators, one real, the other would be, stand in mortal combat against one another. The self-contained triune God of Christianity and the homo noumenon, the autonomous man of Immanuel Kant, cannot both be ultimate. We conclude then that when both parties, the believer and the non-believer, are epistemologically self-conscious, that's a key phrase in Van Til, epistemological self-consciousness. When both are epistemologically self-conscious and as such engaged in the interpretive enterprise, they cannot be said to have any fact in common. On the other hand, it must be asserted they have every fact in common. Both deal with the same God and with the same universe created by God. Both are made in the image of God. In short, they have the metaphysical situation in common. Metaphysically, both parties have all things in common, while epistemologically, they have nothing in common. Christians and non-Christians have opposing philosophies of fact. So I read that as kind of a throwback to what you were saying there a second ago when you said, is this from Frame or Van Til? It's actually straight out of, straight out of Compton. It's just straight out of Common Grace for Van Til. So Van Til is addressing science that is conducted in an autonomous manner. Naturalistic, rationalistic assumptions, assuming that there are brute facts up for grabs that man can interpret from an autonomous standpoint and so forth. So all that kind of lies behind the way he's trying to interact with the Kantian distinction between the noumenal and the phenomenal. So that as background. Van Til holds the word ultimate as how would I say this, applicable to the self-contained triune God of Christianity, not the autonomous Kantian autonomous human being. Only God is ultimate. So I'm going to read just a quick little thing here, and I think this will help. What Van Til meant by the word ultimate, wherein he says that the self-contained triune God of Christianity and the homo noumenon, the autonomous man of Immanuel Kant, cannot both be ultimate, has to be understood in light of the way in which he had just used the term ultimate 4 sentences earlier in the same paragraph when he spoke of God alone as having ultimate definitory power. In other words, by ultimate, Van Til is dealing with the issue of epistemological authority rather than, and underline this, ontological existence. That Boswell found this ambiguous, again, must be attributable to the way in which he conceived the function of his dualistic realism, which could only conceive of the noumenal phenomenal distinction in relation to real entity. Whatever the case, no one should accuse Boswell of being unwilling to follow his critique to its logical conclusion. Quote, I'm afraid Professor Van Til's doctrine of creation is a mere non-temporal mental act of God, which does not give ontological status to the thing created other than the thought of God himself. In one fell swoop, he dismisses the problem as a function of Van Til's latent idealism. Van Til defends his position, writing in the article Presuppositionalism, and I quote, a word may here be said about the relation of the ontological trinity to temporal creation. You assert the following, quote, the doctrine of paradox comes in its extreme expression in the words, we have in our doctrines the ontological trinity and temporal creation cut ourselves loose once and for all from correlativism between God and man. Then you criticize my rejection of correlativism as though in rejecting it, I were rejecting the idea of man's relatedness to and dependence upon God. Was there any need for giving my word such a construction? Even the sentence following upon the one you quote shows that I am arguing for the God of the Bible, who is back of history, who has his plan for history against those who speak of a comprehensive reality which includes God and man in one whole. Does it follow that I reject the teaching which connects God necessarily with the world or makes him a principle within the world? This is why I think common grace and nature and scripture are such crucial texts, to such crucial Van Tilian material to read and to understand Van Til. In a nutshell, Boswell missed, it seems to me, that what Van Til was guarding against was, Van Til was not suggesting that man does not exist and that that the world is just exists not in reality, but only in the mind of God. But he was trying to establish man as covenantally accountable to God and not autonomous. Yeah. Van Til did not suggest, as Buswell said, that man does not, and I quote, hold an actual status.
Right.
He was trying to say that man does not have definitory power. He is not autonomous, and he is covenantally accountable. Yeah. Buswell misconstrued all of that as to suggest that Van Til doesn't even believe that Adam was created.
Yeah.
That he had ontic existence.
Yeah.
And it's further reason why I titled my dissertation "The Fountainhead of Misunderstanding," because it was Buswell who called Van Til the fountainhead of presuppositionalism. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. Buswell was an earnest, godly, and learned man, but he simply was either incapable or unwilling to understand Van Til at all these points along the way that Van Til was trying to explicate himself.
Yeah, and I think that that distinction you made between ontology and epistemology is so important, because he's talking about the definitory power, which may be a unique Van Til word, but it makes sense. Man cannot define himself. We're talking about epistemology over here, and so God defines man, and it doesn't mean man doesn't have any existence outside of the mind of God. It means that man doesn't get to say, here's who I am. I'm autonomous. I'm born. And we know this from everything. We know this from psychology. We know we're not a tabula rasa. We know all sorts of things. We're born into a family, into a particular history. All these things external to us define us. But like you were saying, the creator-creature distinction is under attack all over the place today, at least in Western society. And it's a battle over the definitory power, as Van Til says, that I will define myself. I feel this way, or I want to do this or that. And it's an attack on the creator. The creator has given you a place in history. He's given you a family. He's said who you are. And you say, well, no, I'm going to reinterpret reality, not according to the creator's thoughts.
Exactly. He uses the language of ultimate definitory power. That's what Van Til speaks, that man assumes ultimate definitory power. The unbelieving scientist assumes ultimate definitory power of himself, of his own existence, of his place in the world, of the phenomenon around him, of the explanations of the facts around him. And so ultimate definitory power is an important concept for Van Til. And this will kind of give you an idea of something that that Buswell found so confusing. It's a short little paragraph here by Van Til. Man's scientific procedure was accordingly to be marked off by the attitude of obedience to God. He was to realize that he would find death in nature everywhere if he manipulated it otherwise than as being the direct bearer of the behests of God. The rational creature of God must naturally live by authority in all the activities of his personality. All these activities are inherently covenantal activities, either of obedience or disobedience. Man was created as an analog of God. His thinking, his willing, and his doing is therefore properly conceived as at every point analogical to the thinking, willing, and doing of God. It is only after refusing to be analogous to God that man can think of setting a contrast between the attitude of reason to one type of revelation and the attitude of faith to another type of revelation. So the whole science faith thing is because the supposed bifurcation between science and faith, or reason and faith, is because man has assumed ultimate definitory power over all of it. And again, it gets back to the creator-creature distinction. Yeah. There's a reason why in all of the one of the most famous pictures of Van Til is with him, the chalkboard behind him with the two circles, and God is one and man is the other. It wasn't simplistic, but there was a simplicity to it that was functionally, programmatically basic to everything for him as a creator-creature distinction. And it was Buswell's misunderstanding of that led him to this, and his hyper concern that Van Til, because he used idealistic terminology, was an idealist, was somehow denying ontically real, or ontic reality, ontically real created reality, which is just absurd,
Yeah.
and to say the least.
Yeah. Well, man, this is so good. It reminds me how much I love Van Til and how often he's misconstrued. I'll say I will agree with everyone else that okay, sometimes he's hard to read. I don't think he's that
Oh,
hard to read, but like
he can be.
Scott Oliphant has all those notes. They're really helpful. A couple other professors from Westminster, they're really super helpful. You can grab any book today, and they'll have all these really helpful notes for you. Okay, there's some blame for Van Til, but others it's confusing sometimes because to me it seems utterly Christian that of course God is the ontological Trinity is the starting point for everything. Of course, Scripture says this. Like of course the Bible would be the principium cognoscendi externum. Like of course that makes sense. So it's always kind of frustrating, but it's encouraging again to hear about Van Til's doctrine of common ground, um, being grounded in the Imago Dei, that we have the ontic reality, we have the world as it is. I live there and the unbeliever lives there. And though our epistemologies have nothing in common because I have God as the bedrock and they don't, we still both have to deal with the same ontology, the same reality. And we can use that to point them back and get them to epistemological self-awareness, self-consciousness, and say, hey, look, your epistemology is not matching up with your metaphysics or your ontology.
Yeah, Van Til called that removing the iron mask from the face of the unbeliever. So while our epistemologies are different, both the believer and the unbeliever are, operating according to inductive reasoning and scientific inquiry and deductive reasoning in math. They are assuming the laws of logic, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, the law of non-falsification, etc. We're all assuming those things and operating according to them, but only one epistemic worldview can account for those things being what they are, whereas any other worldview not only cannot account for those things, but actually mitigate against the very possibility of those things. So, for instance, a materialist worldview assumes inductive reasoning and the regularity of nature in order for, say, a materialist scientist to do his work. But his worldview not only cannot account for inductive reasoning and the normativity or the regularity of nature, actually, the idea of a random of a worldview where all that exists is matter in random motion mitigates against the very possibility of inductive reasoning and regularity of nature. You could go straight down the line with all of these things: deductive reasoning and math, objectivity and predication. One epistemology can account for objectivity and predication. The other depends upon objectivity and predication, but their worldview can't account for it and actually mitigates against words actually having meaning. And of course, I think post-Enlightenment atheism kind of, that was massaged out with Wittgenstein and Derrida and Rorty and Jean-Francois Lyotard and Michel Foucault and others on as it relates to language and actually having objectivity in predication, words actually having meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why and Van Til would say, look, at the end of the day, this Christian Trinitarian worldview is the only worldview that will extricate one from that constant vortex that exists, or that sort of ping-ponging back and forth between rationalism and irrationalism.
Yeah.
And we see every other worldview going one way or the other. And the weaknesses of rationalism, the weaknesses of irrationalism, the weaknesses of a rationalistic kind of empiricism or logical empiricism are easy enough to define, and the weaknesses of some kind of irrational postmodern standpoint epistemology is easy enough to detect. But I think Van Til, probably of everything that he found difficult with Buswell, probably was Buswell's charge that he denied the historical Adam. I have a section of my dissertation where I say Van Til proceeds to pelt Buswell with numerous examples from his writings where he clearly teaches the historical Adam. And but all of this flows from Buswell's painting of Van Til as an idealist and a one who believes in contradiction, and one who has bought into an idealist understanding of the concrete universal, basically identifying the one historical Adam with mankind in general, and there wasn't an actual historical Adam. And I think Van Til probably found it more frustrating than anything that Buswell simply couldn't see black and white, where he clearly was teaching the Genesis account of creation, the reality of the individual historic man Adam, etc. So I think give it to Buswell. He held on like a bulldog in many ways and just refused to let go of some of his own presuppositions, if I can say it that way, about, he approached he approached Van Til with an interpretive grid that he never was willing to have it adjusted.
Man, well, that's so good. I love your dissertation. I looked it over again this morning, and just super good stuff. I think, I don't know if this is like scooping or anything. I think there is plans to turn this into a book. Is that right?
Yeah, we're talking about it. I've got to get on it and get some things in place and pursue that. But Scott, my advisor, Dr. Scott Oliphant, has encouraged me toward that end, and so I need to do that. I think there may be 8 or 9 people in the world waiting with bated breath to read it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm one of them, man.
Geeks like you and me.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, well, I'm excited for it. All right. Well, folks, that's going to have to do it for now. Lord willing, we can continue this conversation. Maybe we talk some Edwards, talk idealism and Edwards or something. Sometime.
Yeah, I got all my Edwards up here.
I love that. I see the balloons.
Edwards was really, this is a chocolate Edwards. Actually, it's not chocolate. It was like, here we go. Yeah, it's a sculpture of Edwards. Edwards is really another one of my main areas of academic interest. And not just that, I don't know where I would be spiritually apart from Edwards. I think for me, I think I may have said this in our last time we were together. I always tell my seminary students, you need traveling partners. Ministry is hard. And it was David Martin Lloyd-Jones who said that a pastor must have the heart of a child, the mind of a scholar, and the hide of a rhinoceros. And sometimes, ministry is, can be really, really difficult, and you need traveling partners. And for me, I honestly don't know where I would be without C.S. Lewis and Jonathan Edwards and Cornelius Van Til. I think I said this last time we were together. C.S. Lewis is an example of a man who makes me want to believe the Christian worldview. Jonathan Edwards is an example to me of a man who did thoroughgoingly believe the Christian worldview. And Van Til is the one who gives me a justification for believing it. In fact, he's the one who gives me the justification of belief, period. He's the one who helps me account for the justification of justification in terms of epistemological, basis for proof, for evidence, for logic, for any of those things. And I think for folks who are willing to go through some of the difficult prose at places, it can be a little bit difficult to read. What you will have in Van Til is an undeniable, absolute proof, not just for the concept of proof, but an absolute proof for the triune God of the Bible, and the Bible of the triune God. Because as he says, the absolute proof of Christianity is apart from it, you can't prove anything.
Right. Man, I love it.
Yeah,
it's encouraging. I got to get back and get back into more Van Til, man. It's been a couple months since I've read anything by him, so I'm going to jump on that. Folks, that's going to have to be it for now. But Lord willing, we'll continue this. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.